Hi, I'm Ed Haig, Director at Source, and following the publication of our US Consulting Market Report for 2013, I wanted to share with you just a few short thoughts about the market there. The good news is that this is a market growing very well. So growth between 2011 and 2012 was about 9%. And that means that the US is really bucking the trend. In fact, in a sense, it's sort of breaking a rule, because broadly speaking, you can divide the consulting market into two broad camps. On the one hand, there are small but emerging and very fast growing markets, and on the other hand, there are much larger, much more mature but much slower growing markets. And generally that rule applies pretty much wherever you are. It's either small, emerging and fast growing, or big, mature and slow growing. But the US, as I say, is bucking that trend. Actually, it's the biggest consulting market in the world by some distance, now worth, we think, just over $39 billion. And it's growing extremely well as well. So growth of 9% is pretty hard to find anywhere else in the world at the moment. We should note here that our definition of management consulting focuses only on what we call big consulting. So this is consulting typically done for organisations with revenues in excess of $500 million, and by consulting firms with at least 50 consultants. So we're looking at the big end of the market. And also we include IT systems integration, although we do capture IT consulting, pure IT consulting itself. So this is a big market now, the world's biggest, and growing very well. And I think that's a source of great comfort to many people. It's certainly showing the US rebounding on a trajectory that's more familiar to people who have lived through previous downturns than what we have now in Europe, which is a much less traditional recovery. What's driving growth? Well, I think there are three things more than anything else. The first is simply the US economy, and that too is recovering in a way that European economies, for example, aren't so well. There's still a lot of uncertainty in Europe. So a lot of activity in consulting in the US is being driven by a reasonably resurgent economy. There is, of course, as well a labour market flexibility in the US that there isn't in all other markets. And that creates a really strong foundation for the consulting market. It creates the right conditions for consulting to exist, in a way that you don't find in markets like, for example, the Nordics, or indeed in France. If you take the Nordics as an example, actually they're an interesting one, because Nordic economies are broadly in pretty good shape at the moment, and yet there's a cultural sensitivity informed by fairly rigid labour market policies to the use of consultants that means there's an inherent cultural barrier. And that really doesn't exist in the US. This is a very flexible labour market, and those are conditions that consultants thrive in. This is a good environment for consulting. So the basic fundamentals are right. We should point out here, though, that I'm drawing comparisons between the US and Europe, but in fact it would be easy to get carried away and think that the US isn't afflicted by any of the troubles that its European counterparts are, and that wouldn't be right, because when we survey clients, actually we see a lot of the same opinions and a lot of the same data on both sides of the Atlantic. So clients in Europe are generally quite wary about their use of consultants at the moment, and keen to reduce their expenditure as much as possible. And actually, underneath the really resurgent US consulting market, we see the same story there. Actually, clients still feel as though they're trying to do more in-house. They're trying to reduce their use of consultants. So we shouldn't get too carried away with thinking that all the trouble is past in the US, and that we're now kind of plain sailing. Actually, there's still a lot of difficulty to be overcome in the US market. Nevertheless, that kind of flexibility exists where it doesn't always elsewhere. And I think the other really big thing that's driving the US market at the moment is digitisation. And once again, if we compare with Europe, and indeed the rest of the world actually, the interesting thing is that, broadly speaking, what's driving consulting everywhere else in the world is, to some degree or in some dimension, globalisation. pretty much every client in Europe at the moment and pretty much every consulting firm is talking about globalization being the driver of their business. And in the US, we replace globalization with digitization. Most conversations with most consulting firms and most clients end up on the subject of digitization in some way. Now, of course, digitization's been around for many years, and in some respects, it's a slightly awkward term. But I think it describes how now companies are becoming more than just superficially digital, but actually becoming truly digital operations, truly digital enterprises. And it's something that we don't have time to discuss in detail here, but is keeping a lot of people very busy, both on the client and the consulting firm side. Of course, the thing about digitization as well is that it links two of the biggest agendas in consulting at the moment, and that is the growth agenda and the efficiency agenda. And what's really unique about the market globally today is that we see both of those being in very sharp focus at the same time. In the past, typically, clients have either been focused on one or the other, but at the moment they're focused on both. And digitization serves both of those agendas. So it's a really unifying dimension within the market. I think it's fair to say as well, of course, that the US consulting market has always been driven by technology to some extent. This is where the US consulting market came from. This is what gave the US consulting market the leaps that it made through the 80s and 90s at least. And so there's always been a very strong link, and I think digitization now is the latest iteration of that propensity for technology to drive consulting in the US. The interesting thing here is that when we survey clients, once again the US stands in stark contrast from elsewhere. So clients pretty much anywhere else in the world will tell you that what they want from consulting firms is a business-led approach to technology. And US clients are unique in that they tell us they want a technology-led approach to business. So US clients really understand that growth in their business, that new opportunity, new ways of doing things, new ways of operating come through technology rather than the other way around. So digitization is a very big dimension in the US consulting market, and one we'll be tracking closely over the next few years. I hope that gives you some brief insights into the US market. If you'd like to know more, you can find contact details on our website. We'd be delighted to hear from you and to answer any questions you have. The report is now published and available, and you can find details about how to buy that online as well. Thanks very much.